Hey, Logan. Are you okay?
You're here.
Where else would I be?
Whoa. Easy, pal. Some things never change.
Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spinner Rack, and today I'm doing a video on the romance between Jean and Wolverine, where it started, how it started, and ultimately when you see this poster, you say, now wait a second. Now I hear that they cast the redhead from Stranger Things as Jean to be sort of, I think Jean, I guess when she got to the team, she was like, well, they're supposedly Iceman is 16, now make everybody 17, and Cyclops, Angel, and Beast around 18. So I guess that's the age range of the X-Men, since Iceman's the youngest. So she would be 17. I guess she's close to 20 now. But at the same time, Wolverine, you know, at one point when Dave Cockrum introduced his face, he was like 40. And then he turned, when Byrne was doing, he was like 60. And then now he's like 100 or 150. Who knows how old he is now. But there's a considerable age difference. Now, when people complain about Kitty Pryde being 13 and Colossus being 17, when initially they weren't a couple, Kitty was just kind of into him. And then I think when Byrne left, Claremont kind of pushed it forward. So then they were making out, and no one had a problem until this day and age, until the internet. So then, but Wolverine, no one has complained about that. That's why I put this picture up, so you could see the age difference. We know how old Hugh Jackman is, and we know how young this character is. That's why they didn't play around with this in the, I guess it'd have to be the Age of the Apocalypse, with Jean when she runs into the Weapon X Wolverine, and they just have a moment, but they can't have a physical moment because X-Men are teens. But they give you the thing where it's young, where they don't have anything physical, but something leading to something later, right? Which was, I guess, kind of established in the X-Men movies. But let's go through it, right? So we have to go through the early history, of course. Regretfully, you have to go through the long way, as I like to do. And obviously, Jean is one of the original X-Men, and she appears, and the first time she's with the team is actually in the first issue. She is like us coming to the X-Men. She, Xavier has kind of given her acceptance letter to come to the school. She comes, and he says he comes to her with a power. It's not before this early part where she had it was retconned that there was a kid that died, and she had emotional issues of hearing the death in her head. So Jean's first appearance was in X-Men #1, and the X-Men were clearly taken with her, but we don't see Scott here, right? And the X-Men outfits are supposed to be fashionable as Christian Dior. That's what it says in there, so keep that in mind, right? But at the same time, we didn't see Cyclops on that page. Here we have the first big interaction between Scott and Jean in the second issue, and Jean is struggling to do her tasks, and Cyclops comes in, and she says, "Oh, Cyclops, what would I have done without you?" And obviously, Iceman isn't too happy about that. So, oh, Cyclops, what would I have done without you? Rats. Anyone could have done this at the save you. Here, Cyclops, you're gonna be such a gallant Prince Charming. Here's a nice icy horse for you to ride, right? So then we also you see Jean cozying up to Cyclops again, right? And same time, they're supposed to go out and find the beast. Please disregard Professor Xavier's thought balloon. It was considered a no prize, right? A mistake. And then there's two Captain Continuities. The other Captain Continuity, Mark Waid, put this back into print. So it was supposed to be gotten rid of. Everyone, people would say it as a joke, but then of course it was brought back by Mark Waid. But we see here in this panel, Jean cozying up to Cyclops, and Cyclops is the cool kind of loner, but he's a loner because his eye beam's always on, and it could kill somebody, right? But Jean was nursing a big crush on Cyclops, even though Jean pulls it off, and she's cool with it in the end. That Angel kind of picks her off her feet and drives away in his fancy car, right? And we see here, right, where Cyclops gets, he's now the leader of the team, she has this tender moment, even Angel can see it, right? And Angel's kind of the one who kind of helped along Scott and Jean. So even though he was a suitor, he's taken her out for dinner, or he's taking her out to be back before dinner, he kind of helped them along. He kind of steps away, and Jean and Cyclops happen, but the way they were dealing with it, well, before that happens, Jean decides she wants to leave. And this is the first time when she decides to leave, Xavier is not a stern disciplinarian and screaming and yelling. He does do that in X-Men 94, but if written right, it would be just like this, that she would decide to leave and Xavier would be okay with it, right? So she leaves ultimately because she's struggling with Cyclops, because Cyclops isn't showing any feelings. He can't because he's worried about having any kind of physical relationship would lead to his optic blast blasting through someone. So when Angel has his last date, he brings Cyclops along. There's two other guys already at Jean's college. So Angel is like, that's it for me. I am stepping out. And he starts talking with Candy Southern, who's a person he kind of grew up with. And he feels a connection with her, right? So at the same time, Scott hangs around long enough to be the last one hanging out with Jean. So then they're dancing and they're having a moment. And the X-Men team are also happy to get Jean back. And he says he's going to tell her his feelings very, very soon. And when Professor X dies and the team breaks up, we find Jean and Cyclops are hanging out together. He is the boyfriend / protector when she's doing modeling jobs. And then you see the Neil Adams things. They don't show them being they don't actually kiss in the first run. They do kind of hang out together because Cyclops is ultimately handicapped, right? So they try to show it in how the fact that they didn't really show them being physical, but despite that, Jean is very much into Cyclops. So that gets to that chapter. That's the history of the Jean and Scott romance. It was a Jean to Cyclops thing. Cyclops did have feelings, but he was holding back because even to this day, his eyesight isn't under control and it's too cool to fix it, right? So at some point, the old X-Men begets the new X-Men. We're not getting to that whole story. Dave Cockrum gets on the book. And we got these new X-Men that come along. And the plan was to have the international team and the old team to go away. So this is the idea to fix this, since the X-Men never was really successful. Outside of when Neil Adams was gone, they said there was a bump up. So ultimately they kept it alive. And then at some point in reprints, but then they did the new X-Men, right? So the new X-Men are in this big battle with the Sentinels. And in this issue, Jean, an issue before this, Jean, Banshee, and Wolverine are kidnapped. Jean is not on the team right now. That's why doesn't have a corner box. She was supposed to be Miss Marvel, but then they decided on Carol Danvers, right? And with Jean captured, she gets smacked. We see Wolverine go into action. He kills a whole bunch of people when he sees this, right? And next thing you know, so they get the other team free, right? And they find out bits about Wolverine they didn't know. She's trying to got her dressed, and Wolverine just rips it, right? And it's extremely short. And this is the thing to remember. This is back when Wolverine really couldn't do anything right. He was a total jerk, had no bedside manner. He was just, and we'll see as this portion goes through, right? So as they're free, they're like, hey group, time's a wasting. Let's get out of here while we got the chance. And Jean is like, not without the professor. And Banshee agrees. And then, so you got a better idea? Look, he's crippled and unconscious. How are we going to carry him in a fight, right? And then Jean is leading and said, we'll find a way. And then they have to take out another Sentinel. But it shows how much a jerk Wolverine is. He wanted to leave Professor Xavier to die while they escape, right? And at the same time, as things go awry, Wolverine is back with all of the new X-Men, and they're fighting the old ones. Now, he was just with Jean, right? And this is a big surprise, but I just want to ultimately also have this shot, which is a great shot. Claremont is one of the best artists. His run is almost unparalleled as far as the art, right? And the energy is really great, right? So when Wolverine is surprised that Xavier stands up. So Jean attacks, and he's like, hey, he tells us that he knows senses and mannerisms and all the stuff he doesn't know from faces, and he knows it's not Jean, but this kind of stops the fight, all right? And Wolverine realized that he met the enemy, and it ain't us. So with his senses, he figured out that this is not Jean, right? So then they're stuck in space, and their solar flare is about to hit them, and Wolverine's like, it's not going to work, you know. You're bugging for martyrdom of the year or something, and then Jean is asking him to get out of here, and tells her not to commit suicide trying to save them, and then Jean says, my name is Jean, mister, and I've just about had it with you. I've tried to like you, Wolverine, obnoxious little upstart that you are, but for the life of me, I don't know why I made the effort. So go shut your mouth and get into the life cell now before I lose my temper. And cuts him low, right? And then Jean and Storm have a moment. They don't argue, but it shows she never kind of warmed up to Wolverine. This is before the Phoenix, right? You know, they just been arguing this whole time, and not good argument that would lead to, because you'll see it sort of somehow flips some point later, right? But we see the dynamic of this thing. We see Wolverine can be, even before this part makes a little sense, but she's taking the leadership thing to save the X-Men, right? And to her avail, she saves the X-Men and becomes the Phoenix, right? Nobody knows what that is, but they take her to the hospital afterwards. And Wolverine is deciding to go to the hospital. And then he gets the flowers for a sick friend, and Wolverine doesn't want to say anything. Man, you got to be crazy. You know that. You're like acting like school kids still wet behind the ears for some broad. What's Jean grade to you anyway? You know, and then and someone like someone I like and want, and what Wolverine wants, he gets. Right? So then I never felt this. I felt like this before. All hot and bothered over a frail. I never cared about anyone like that. I've always been a loner, right? So he's got all his energy up for Jean, and when he comes in, he sees everybody else is already there, and they're all sad. So this would be a good moment to show that he also has a heart, but he tosses the flowers out. So he's full on still a jerk, right? Because he could have just had flowers for her like everyone else probably did, right? So later, I think X-Men go into space, and a little while after that, Wolverine gets a new outfit, which we see here. And this is a pivotal moment in the Jean and Wolverine relationship, right? But we haven't seen anything from the Jean side, right? We've seen a little from the Wolverine side, right? Jean is having a party, right? And Wolverine somehow got invited, and this is crazy. What am I doing? Mooning over some lousy frail. He called her a lousy frail. Love him and leave him. That's always been my way till now. Jean Grey's different. Can't get her out of my thoughts. Man, how can she love? I said, how can she think she loves a gutless wimp like Summers? He ain't the lady for you. I am. And he rips the picture. Now, we know in the X-Men cartoon, he has a picture of them and he doesn't destroy it. This one, he gets rid of Scott, right? But he hears someone in Jeannie's house, so he goes to check it out. And this is the major moment, right? Wolverine is attacking Iron Fist. He doesn't know who Iron Fist is, but he thinks he's a burglar. And he says, you're trespassing in my woman's place. Now, they haven't had any sort of thing together. And now he's saying this is his woman, right? So they have a fight. He kicks around Wolverine all around the place. And when the X-Men finally stop Iron Fist, we get this really cool moment. Even though Wolverine got beat up by Iron Fist, we get this. This is the moment that Wolverine stole the show, right? And something happens, but that's Jean. Jean comes in and stops the fight and says, "Hey, butt out, Summers. Look, Jimmy, I found this burglar here, and he said, that's my roommate Misty Knight's best friend." All right, so this issue is pretty funny. If you have it, I have it. I'm glad I still kept it. Right? I couldn't sell this one. Right? So basically, the landlord's upset, but Iron Fist says he's going to pay for everything, and Wolverine is going to work on the damage, right? And Dave Cockrum redrew all of the X-Men faces here, right? So, here, and this is a later issue where, everything is kind of, they're just hanging out, and Wolverine wants to continue playing and not be, have the downtime with the friends. She tries to talk to Wolverine. This is Wolverine at the right height to Jean, right? And he says, I like being a loner, Jeannie. No hassles, no complications, no grief. I lived my whole life not knowing what love is and not caring either until I met you. So he has this big crush. We've yet to see Jean do anything or have any feelings toward Wolverine, right? So I just threw this in there because this is another Jean Wolverine moment. But at this point, the X-Men are brainwashed by Mesmero, and he is trying to snap her out of the trance, and ultimately it works, right? And then this leads to a big magnetic story where they're stuck in a volcano, and Jean Beast believe the X-Men have died. Now remember, Scott, who she loves, has died. It didn't draw out the Phoenix power. So this thing where she sees someone die and it draws out, someone love die, draws out the Phoenix power, does not happen. So even X-Men 137, seeing Scott getting shot down by the Imperial Guard would not lead for the Phoenix to bust out of the psychic breakers, because those were supposed to be stronger. And the psychic breakers she imposed on herself was strong enough not to counteract the terrible times the X-Men were in. So that's something to remember, right? So while they think, the X-Men also think that Jean is dead. Jean and Beast have died. And they're just dreading telling the professor. But Wolverine doesn't care about that. Wolverine, there were some girls with Colossus, and he doesn't want to go with them. He's like, and he says, babe, you're the first person I ever really cared for. And I never even told you my real name. I had plans for us, Jeannie. No, I got is an ache inside that's killing me, right? So he had the picture that he ripped out with just, what's the name? He kept it close to he kept it under his belt, and he destroys the picture. She's gone. But on their trek of going across the world, they go to Japan, and Wolverine runs into Mariko. And now, whereas Genie was one he was trying to thinking of long term, Mariko kind of is the reverse. It's everything Wolverine is not. Very delicate, and this, that, and the other. And this leads Wolverine to bring out everything that he was not with Jean. This is the way we get the romantic Wolverine. He's toned down everything, the same technique that he used for trying to approach a deer. He's like using all of those abilities, and that's the thing. The deer portion, approaching the deer thing, was something that Chris Claremont had put through. He's using all this to interact with Mariko, right? And he speaks Japanese, and they say he speaks Japanese very well. For an American, but he's a Canadian, and he develops a relationship with Mariko. It's a very long-term relationship. It's very important to his life, and somehow, when then he just becomes some point he just becomes a hound. But up until the Wolverine miniseries, they are a item for a very long time, right? And he said, living day by day is fine for broads like Crackling Rosa, or maybe even Jean Grey, but not Mariko Yoshida, right? So he's really thinking of something important with her, right? And at the same time, the X-Men finally figure out that Jean hasn't died, and Jean figures out the X-Men haven't died, and they come in this big battle with Proteus, right? And here's Proteus. He's taking over his father's body. He plans to take over Mora when Mora body thing, because this is like the most powerful he's been. And if the X-Men hadn't come along to fight against him, he might have lasted a lot longer than most of the other bodies he's taken over, right? But the X-Men are out here, trying to stop him. And Jean hits him with a psychic attack, and it hurts him a lot. But then he finally decides to fight back and makes Jean feel like she was dead and buried while she was standing. And Wolverine comes in and says, "Leave her alone. I love that lady, bub, and I'll see you dead before I see her hurt again." Right? So we see at this point he's talking in the past tense, right? So even though he was still nursing, and he likes the Phoenix side. Like, this is the thing. Even though he liked the earlier Jean, he really likes the energy of the Phoenix, right? And at the same time, when Jean gets controlled by the Hellfire Club and she breaks it, she says, "Jeannie, you're working on the side of the angels after all. Nice, sneaky. It was a nice, sneaky moves, lady. You're a woman after my own heart." I said, "I know, I wish I wasn't." Right? So that's the moment. Then, of course, Jean becomes Dark Phoenix. So I point all this out to say, here's all the X-Men moments. There are no moments where Jean is like, "Oh, I have feelings for you." Or is there? Right? So at this moment, the X-Men are really trying to stop Jean, but Wolverine has another plan. Wolverine's like, "I got to take her out." Right? So, Eric said everyone is, holding back. He's going to take care of this permanently. And Jean's like, "Do it, Wolverine. Strike while human part of me is still in control. Finish me with your claws. I beg you, I don't want to hurt you." And if you think about it, this is more the Phoenix playing around with Wolverine's emotions. She, figured a way to even break his hair trigger, by pointing out Jean bringing Jean back again, having this full moment, which probably went to say to fans and even possibly Chris Claremont was like, wow, she, the real Jean really said something to him. But Cyclops is the one kind of talks Jean off the ledge all the time. He has the best ability to do that. See, Wolverine just got, knocked out. And then Wolverine, this introduces a bit that no one likes to pay attention to, because initially Jean was supposed to be just the Phoenix, not as an entity. But Wolverine says, nobody understands Jean like I do. That she becomes two separate identities, Jean and Phoenix. Jean ain't the killer. She can't be held responsible for Phoenix's action. But can the professor really split the two entities apart? Right? So Wolverine says he still stand behind Jeannie all the way. Right? And X-Men lose. Phoenix, because they had to, comes back, and Wolverine's plan to take her out this time is to use Colossus. He said, I loved in past tense that woman, Petey, and because of that love, I might hesitate. It happened before, and we almost got killed as a result. This time I can't afford to take that, this time, that's a risk I can't afford to take. Sorry, guys. So he uses Colossus, and Colossus can't do it. But Jean is kind of like, hey, this is Jean is like, so you should have took my head off. So you realize that she's got infinite kind of power, and then she decides to take her own life. All right? So we've gone through it. We don't have any moments where Jean has had any feelings for Wolverine, right? So, so I think it's, what is it? I think 6 years later, Jean comes back. She's found in Jamaica Bay, and then this issue of the Fantastic Four, and the Avengers find her, and the Fantastic Four are living in the building with the they're living at the Avengers mansion. So when they come in, Avengers had this cocoon. It's in Jamaica Bay. Now, Jean and the X-Men, when the Phoenix saved them in the space shuttle during the solar flare, they landed in Jamaica Bay. So her body was actually still in there, and the Phoenix was trying to keep it there. So if she needed it at some point later, she could recharge. But that's really kind of the story Byrne wanted. That's not what it kind of played out. But she comes back, and Chris Claremont has it so that Jean tainted the Phoenix, right? So that kind of, Byrne didn't write his name to this, right? So the humanity turned the Phoenix bad, right? So they try to show what they did was have a nice Phoenix entity, and they try to say Jean was at fault. So that was one of the retcon of Jean actually being alive is first, but then Chris Claremont retconned that Phoenix tainted the evil Phoenix entity. And Chris Claremont, I guess, kind of liked writing Jean. So when he got a chance to do classic X-Men and they needed some more pages for some strange reason, he decided to fill them with retcons. This portion is a retcon here, right? So you see Wolverine coming on to Jean and Angel coming over to stop him, right? So Cyclops, for some reason at the Krakoa, has to write down all this stuff while it's fresh in his mind when he could just be debriefed by Professor Xavier. He's done it before, so I never really understood that, right? But he, of course, needs to be more into something more than Jean, which leads her to walk around the mansion, even though he was the one who went back to save her, right? And he doesn't know that this is going to lead him to lose her, right? So, but this wasn't in the original stuff. When Jean leaves, she's leaving the team because she's going to become Miss Marvel, and Marvel changed their mind. But he's adding a lot of story into this that's not there, and doesn't work with the original plot, right? So and Wolverine comes out of nowhere and he asks if he wants a drink and says, "No, thank you." He said, "Kind of man I am, darling. I know what I want the minute I lay eye on it. And what Wolverine wants, he gets. Heart pounding, Genie. You're breathing awfully fast. Gives me the impression the feeling's mutual. You're mistaken. Want to bet? No, Wolverine, this is a mistake." So she's saying no. She said no to him twice, and he's going against it. And no does not mean no for Wolverine if he can sense that there's some attraction. Now, even if there's attraction, no still means no. And Angel is actually making good time with Storm, but he sees Wolverine with Jean, so he goes to save her and yanks her away. And then for some reason she says, "Are you insane, Warren? We're just talking." And then they're about to get into a fight, and but Jean doesn't say, "Hey," he was kind of, he wasn't taking no for an answer. And he hits the, what's the name? They're telling Angel to take off, and then Storm comes in, and he's like, "See, try to gut me with those claws." And then they kind of blame Angel for what's going on. And then Wolverine says he's bad news. Then why did he go try to approach her the way he did? And he does kill. And she's like, "I'm not afraid. I feel your pain, Wolverine. The anguish of body and spirit. I want to help. So does Professor. Otherwise, why bring you here? Welcome them to the X-Men." Right? So then she goes into Professor Xavier, and the next I love Scott with all my heart, but there's no denying the attraction between me and Wolverine. The longer we're together, the more I'm afraid of yielding. Right? So this kind of reverses the whole thing that Jean decides to leave because Wolverine is here. When before, Xavier was shocked that they were leaving. He was pretty upset. And here they have this tender moment of her exiting. So it doesn't make sense if you look at X-Men 94, where Professor Xavier is surprised. Right? So they say their goodbyes. And then we have this other story. The first story was written by Chris Claremont. I'm going to show you now this no mean no stuff. There's not just guys writing. No means yes. And the no means yes here is that they go into the sewer system to stop these chud. They're basically chud, right? So this is written by Innocenti, right? So they're getting some burgers or something like that. And while Scott is getting them like a jerk, he can't see that Wolverine is just putting the moves on Jean again, right? He said, "Now we're going to be coy and innocent, huh? Cut the phony act, Jean. There's a current running hot between the two of us, between us, a two-way current. You may love Scott, but you want me. I do not. Look, you can't suppress things. You can't shove your desires in the dark corner of your mind and expect them to be there quietly and behave. You got to deal with it, or there'll be some backlash, like flushing something bad down the drain. It's got to back up sometime, bury it, and it'll get you back." And he said, "Okay, well, I'll deal with it. One of us has to lead the team. And then Scott comes out like a jerk. "Howdy, kids. Get them while they're hot." And then Jean hears something, and it's a psychic lash, and she takes them to go see what's going on. Right? Something in the sewer. So for some reason, Scott is staying up top, and she goes with Wolverine for some strange reason, right? So to get all this, so again, this is another stilted one, right? And while they're down there, he keeps touching her and stuff like that. He's telling her, don't, he likes the view. She says, "Don't do that. Don't touch me." He's saying he's touching her. And it's not, oh no, it's actually the creature, right? And then Wolverine cuts it. It's still alive. It just becomes smaller. They don't die. They just multiply. And she uses her telekinetic ability to push them back. And they're calm for a minute. And Wolverine kind of likes it. He likes these creatures all over them, right? And he's flirting at the same time. And she's telling him to stop. You're not helping. And telling him to shut up. And her behind is in his face the entire time. So obviously there's this current that's supposedly going on, right? And Wolverine likes it and causing them to get even closer. So another stilted story forcing these two people to get close. We'll see this a lot happening, right? So now these creatures are forcing them together. These likes, somehow Wolverine, they're not biting them. They're covering them for some reason. When they got the teeth out, shouldn't they just be biting them? Nope. They want to wrap around them as a swarm. So they become like thing, and Wolverine thinks they're cute. He's all rubbed up against her. And he's still flirting, and they're sweating in there. And they say, Scott has a plan. He said, let's do it. And then he said, ready? Yes. Come on, Jean, come here. Deal with me. And we don't see anything, and then the Phoenix gets them free. And then and Scott says, Jean, are you okay? Was it horrible? And it's an unsaid thing. He said, best time I've had in months, right? Scott has his head down. So at least Jean still has her clothes on. So before we get into that, now if you man, the Jean in present day is in X-Force. She came back to life. She's in X-Force. Because of office politics, the X-Men and X-Factor can't get together. So a bunch of things happen. The Mutant Massacre, the fall of mutants would leave the X-Men dead or seemingly dead. And in the fall of mutants, X-Factor become the kind of lead team in the Marvel Universe, the lead mutant team. The X-Men become behind the scenes heroes that can't be seen, but everyone thinks the X-Men are dead, right? So Inferno is where we deal with the Jean and Madeline storyline, and mind you, the X-Men don't act like Madeline looks anything alike. Only one who feels kind of like that is Cyclops, which means that they're kind of what I think, Mastemind was doing, but they kind of threw out a lot of the Mastemind plot, right? So let's see. So Mastemind plot kind of led into everything that was happening to Jean. That here was a girl that was its entire desires, and that's what Mastemind had given to Jean. Now somehow he's found a Jean lookalike, and she was just as understanding as Jean and all this other stuff. So there's that, right? So she becomes Madeline becomes a Goblin Queen, becomes a big crossover, right? And a little before this, Wolverine realizes that Jean is alive. And the moment he senses her, he knocks out Storm. Now, excuse me. So I mean, I don't know how people let these things go. Every other thing of smacking and hitting women, they don't look past. But Wolverine, I can't get Wolverine canceled. I should change this to Wolverine cannot be canceled, right? So while the X-Men are fighting the Goblin Queen, she becomes turns back to Madeline, and she is, why are you trying to take the baby from me? And Wolverine comes out of nowhere, where he has to confirm what his senses are screaming. And this portion right here is written by Louise Simonson. She didn't write what actually happened. This is by Claremont, where he just snatches her from behind, and kisses her. And when you get kissed by a strange person that you don't know who's doing it, if the kiss is strong enough, you forget everything. And he has this moment. The X-Men are kind of poisoned during this inferno. Since the X Factor are kind of fighting against Madeline, they are not touched by any of this darkness that's going along. And Jean doesn't even know who she's kissing. She's like, "What? Wolverine? What?" She thought he was dead, right? So she says she's nobody's property. She won't be fought over and manhandled, by someone she considered a friend. And she's got so many thoughts, right? But she's still the effects of that kiss. That kiss. So there's another bit I don't have in here talking about Wolverine at some sort of bar. Oh God, I forgot about that. Eesh. Should try to find that and put it in here. But anyway, the next story was the Extinction Agenda. This is the next time they team up because Jean and Wolverine are not on the same teams, and Wolverine is severely injured, and Jean is kind of thrown in the cell, right? So in the cell, she sees a beaten and battered Wolverine, and he's saying hello. She gives a kiss on the nose for some strange reason. Of course, Wolverine, he says it's good to see her. He just grabs her and takes a kiss. And for some reason, she is, enthralled. She can't fight it. And then she says, "Oh, you haven't lost your touch. You're still the best at what you do." Right? And she knows he's dying. So, what was the name? Cameron Hodge put them together to see, because for some reason, Professor Xavier had a dossier about this in there. Like, that's strange. That is ridiculous. They're really trying to retcon this in. This is a huge retcon. Look at them now. I showed you what it was before. Now look at them. And this Wolverine is as tall as Jean. But otherwise, John Bogdanove has done some great art in here. It's just too many characters. And then at some point, there's a lot of story that happens after this. But then the original X-Men come home for X-Men #1. Sorry, I had the 3D cover. But the X-Men come home, and Jean, and this turns into a new, even though Chris Claremont this becomes a new golden age. Even though Chris Claremont isn't on for that long, even though John Byrne isn't on there for that long, even though Jim Lee and Will Portacio isn't on there for that long, Baby Nasenza and Scott Lobdell kind of take over the book. And even though initially I had a lot of issues with it, they kind of ushered the X-Men into the next stage. And they're there for a good while. So you imagine it's like, I don't know, it's like 40 or 45 issues. So it's like 3 years for Nasenza, possibly 4 for Scott Lobdell, but they both kind of got pushed out. So they were running everything X-Men, some of the side books, or single stories, single character stories. And what they ultimately did, Scott Lobdell was a big proponent that, going back to the original stories, that Jean had a huge crush on Cyclops. And Jim Lee was of that thinking, but his idea was kind of push Cyclops and Psylocke together, right? There's hints of it in Extinction Agenda, and then she kind of, stands in front of him half nude all the time. And but I think that kind of, when the doppelganger came of her, that kind of washed away, and that led to Jean and Scott getting married. So they get married. They have an uneventful marriage where nobody dies, thankfully. And excuse me, there's a lot to get to. Basically, Wolverine doesn't show up. He writes a letter to Jean, about not being there that got Chris Claremont pretty upset that he calls him the old knucklehead, right? And then they are pretty much together for a decent while. What else happens? Steve Seagal and Joe Kelly take over. They're still together. And then I think Alan Davis happened. But the big thing that happens that kind of disrupts all this is the X-Men movie. The X-Men movie comes and all bets are off. Look at Wolverine's in the middle. We saw in the other X-Men #1. Go to X-Men #1. Cyclops is really prominent, even though Wolverine's there. Cyclops being taller, a little more prominent than Wolverine, but Wolverine's right there with him. We get to here, Cyclops is all the way on the side. Even Jean's on the other side, but Storm and Wolverine are the draws. So and you consider Rogue. They're kind of the draws of this series. Now, I think there's about 8 or 9 X-Men movies. There might be more, right, in this X-Men universe. And they play up that even before Cyclops was kind of the aloof, kind of cool guy, I guess the James Dean kind of thing, the loner, right? And who barely shows emotion, but he's a great leader. They turn Cyclops into a yes man, or the guy who follows orders. So he's the good guy, and Wolverine's the bad boy. And Jean, who loves Cyclops, it just has more physical feeling for Wolverine, right? So this is the crux of this series, basically the series, right? So he basically has a lot of feeling for Jean, and that led it to just spill over into the comic books. So while Alan Davis was doing the X-Men, they asked him to do a shot where Jean and Wolverine are kissing, and he sent this cover sketch to editorial showing Rogue and Jean kissing. And on the bottom of it, he said, had Xavier and Wolverine. And when they sent this over, editorial got the point that it wasn't related to the story. So they kind of took it out. They were okay with him not doing it and just doing covers that kind of related to the story, right? But he was only on there for a year and a half, maybe more, maybe close to 2 years. And soon after, look what we got. Wolverine and Jean kissing, right? So this is another stilted story to get them to kiss, right? Of course, they have to work together. Cyclops is upset about it, and they're stuck in space, and they have to, they have to say their last goodbye. So since they're going to die, they get caught into this moment, right? And then Grant Morrison played along with this, right? So in the Grant Morrison run early on, he says, we both know the deal, Wolverine says. And this, I'm not going to get into Phoenix coming back, but she comes back in this story. And but before that, they're in space and they're about to die, and they're thinking stuff. Now, when you see these romance thing, the jerk part of Wolverine doesn't come out at all. All right? So, they're just having this thing where they're about to die and they can't take it. And even though they're having all these tender moments, she's talking about Scott, right? So Wolverine decides we're going to die on our own merit. So he takes her out, right? So she doesn't feel the pain. He kills her. And this, of course, brings back the Phoenix in the story. So the Phoenix is supposed... Jean coming from the castle does not supposed to have any Phoenix powers. It's not... The thing is, they wiped out the Phoenix powers. And they gave you an out. So Phoenix was not Jean. That was the point of the story. Her coming back, so she had no connection to the Phoenix. The Phoenix was an entity, and Jean was separated. So that's what they absolved her of the crimes of what happened, that she was stuck in Jamaica Bay the entire time. For her to become a Phoenix again and decide, you know what, I got to kill Jean again so she can be reborn. So she's reborn. I showed you this shot. I don't want to show you. And then at the same time, Magneto gives her a heart attack and she dies. And then way in the future, because Grant Morrison was playing with all of the cliches. So this is kind of his Days of the Future Past. And Phoenix is back, right? And Wolverine, of course, is live. He's been around for, it's been 150 years since we last saw the Grant Morrison story. And Wolverine's asking her to look into his mind. And he sees Scott and Logan. And this kind of calms her down. Next thing you know, she falls out, right? And he says, it's been 150 years since he last saw her face, right? So he's trying to tell her that, so he's kind of now, trying to say, Scott lost his chance, so they can possibly have a moment. And Wolverine stops the Beast. And whoever this guy is cuts his head off. But Morrison was of the mind of, let's have Scott move on. Even though they're married, let's have him move on, right? So he brought in the White Queen. He kind of looked at himself as kind of like a Cyclops. So instead of playing to the fact that Jean is attracted to Wolverine, some other person hotter than Jean comes in and, basically takes her, right? So they have a long relationship that happens. I'm not sure if the regular Jean is back. I know the young Jean had turned back, and she's young, so they don't play the Wolverine and Jean thing. I think Wolverine, when she dies after this, I think Jason Aaron had turned to school, the Jean Grey School of Higher Learning. So, but in X-Men Forever, this is out of continuity. Chris Claremont got to play around with this Jean and Wolverine thing, right? So they, of course, when Claremont gets a chance in his first issue, they're all over each other. And see, now Wolverine's turned the person who says all the right things. And we have she's daydreaming, right? So she can't stay on focus for any 2 seconds. This is X-Men #1. She can't make any sense of anything, right? So I think this story is supposed to take place after X-Men #1, where they were going to try to stop Fabian Cortez. Fabian Cortez attacks and he beats the hell out of the X-Men. And then we have this moment where Wolverine is tending to Jean, and they're all close and all this stuff. And even Kitty Pryde says, "Poor Scott, If I can see it, can he see it too?" Right? And then Fabian comes, beat the hell, and of course Wolverine's like, "Push her out of the way. Jean, get clear. Logan, don't." So then I forget why Nick Fury comes in, right? And they're dealing with Fabian Cortez, but there's something else that's worrying him, so he leaves. But at the same time, they're having this official meeting. We see the official meeting. We'll see the dialogue, but Jean is talking to Wolverine. Scott's worried about you, Logan, and so am I. And he says, but I don't like lying for you. He says, Wolverine says, Slim will get over it, but I won't. If I lost you, I don't know what I would do. What's that? If I lost you, I don't know what. And I know you feel the same. Logan, stay out of my head, darling. And Jean says, remember, I'm your backup. And I'm like, wait a second. When was he is backup? They were on different teams. They're only in one thing. So tonight I'm solo. That means they've been working together. Well, they're not married in this story. So as soon as they got together, they start working together on something, right? And he said, if you need me, I'll be there in a heartbeat. Because now she's a phoenix, right? And he's looking, so this rapport thing that she had with Scott is now her and Wolverine. So it's just like, good Lord. Just overlord, right? And we see what she saw, that Storm kills Wolverine, right? And when that happens, this is again because of Wolverine's death causes Jean to knock out the X-Men, right? Oh, sorry. And of course, it's like, Professor Xavier needs to go in their mind to kind of revive her, and she's still sitting around thinking about Wolverine again. Good Lord, she has nothing else. She doesn't have any higher thoughts. Just thinking about Wolverine, right? And then Jean says, you killed Logan. You burned the flesh from his bones. You stole away his future. And you brought the life of the man I love to an end. And as he fell, you laugh. I don't hear you laughing now. I want to hear you scream. All right, so this, and then at the death, Cyclops says, then it's true about you and Logan. Yes, you love him. And yes, this time the joke's on me. I live, he dies. All hearts are broken. I'm sorry. And Scott says, if you ever need a friend. So this, ugh. So there we have it. Nope, that's not the end. You thought that was the end? Of course it's not the end. Not fini. The thing is, like so many X-Men plots, like Jean coming back, like the Days of Future Past coming back, not on the Chris Claremont byline, but Proteus came back. So many bits. The Hear Me Now X-Men, I'm no longer the woman that you knew. Phoenix coming back again and again. Everything in the X-Men gets reused for a new storyline. And I want to show you where this romance of Wolverine and Jean came from. Now, I think I have it set up, right? Oh, no. She's on the move again. She says she's on the move with in the X-Men Forever by Chris Claremont. The Beast has been harboring some feelings for her, and he's like, how long? So I'm a telepath, Hank, and your friend. I've always known. I just never been free to say yes. And at the same time, I'm like, there was a time where she was very free to say yes. When Cyclops was like, I can't have a relationship. I got these eye beams, and Beast was interested, and she gave him no play. So she was free to date anyone she wanted. Angel, the guy from, what's the name? The guy, the Cobalt Man, those are her suitors that she was around with. She could date Angel, any of those guys. She wasn't interested in any of them. So this thing of never been free, like, come on. So, but Jean goes this part where she just flops around, and Bendis does the same, but she flops around with a lot of guys after this. Like Cyclops was a ball and chain, showing that she wasn't the person that we knew. Kind of a frivolous person that just kind of physical, and not the Jean we once loved, right? And oh yeah, I thought I was gonna jump to show this. You have this cartoon that furthered it on too. I forgot I had this set up, right? So in the 92 cartoon, we just had Wolverine kind of nursing this attraction that he had for Jean. In the classic scene that everyone kind of makes fun of, that's turned Wolverine, as they say, into a simp and all this other stuff, and that can be worse words. But in 97, we had Madeline and Jean married, and she's having a baby, but they kind of flirting with Wolverine, and Wolverine's still struggling with it. But somehow he's not in the action. He's the midwife. He's going along to driving her to the pregnancy thing. He's at the mansion. He's not a man of action anymore. He's the midwife. And how do you have your first pregnancy contact a homicidal maniac or even a failed samurai? Are those the first people that you want to be there for your kid? Nah, I'm not for it. I'm not with it. Driving her to the hospital, like, come on, man. Like, what is going on in this thing? I know everyone loved this thing, but this is Wolverine. Like, you hear his dialogue early on. This thing where he just turned into the same guy he's with Mariko, and he wasn't. He was a love him or leave him, and he was trying to get Jean to like the other version. With Mariko, he was like, I got to turn all that off. Now we just only have this romantic side, which gets on my nerves. And then when Jean Grey comes back, she's just like puts the move on him, but he says, they can't be together, right? And Jean is kind of iffy, but Scott and Jean are kind of set up for the next season. But this season there was a strain, and it showed that she had, with Jean back, she had some interest in Wolverine too. So she was able to reciprocate. So I think that's it. So that's it. Only thing I have this is to show you where it really came from, right? Because the setup is that Jean, which wasn't before, that Jean just loses total control, like loses total control of herself, and that ultimately came from Jason Wyindgard and his relationship with Jean, right? And this is the penultimate chapter of Jason Wyindgard where he kills Cyclops. He had so much power over Jean that he kills Cyclops in front of her. And you say, no way, I say yes. We can see, even though they show it as true feelings, that Jean is in control, but the setup is the same, right? So we have, this is the first meeting of Jean and Jason Wyindgard, right? And he's this dashing guy and friendly, and they meet, right? And she's stuck staring at him. He's like, Jason Wyindgard is watching us sail. There's something about him, some sense of deja vu that I met him before. And he said, yes, he's attracted to me, and why not? When in so many ways, I am the man of her dreams, right? And soon she will love me, and then she will belong to me, mind, body, and soul, to the Hellfire Club. And he's a handsome devil, I'll give him that, right? So she's clearly taken of him, and for some reason, he's everything that he's dreamed of. Tall, I should have showed who the actor is, but he's playing to but at the same time there's this, that's what I wanted to put into this, but there's no point in doing that, right? So we see in the shadow doesn't look like the man, right? So that's going to set up, this is all a mystery to set up who it is, and we should figure this out by the next issue. So the next time he appears, he's still in Scotland, as Jean is, at Muir Island, right? And we realize, he says, hey, he's been following her on her trip while she was traveling, right? He was a priest. He was getting to know her, being this guy that walked up out of nowhere, And then you see him, he puts up this image of Jean. So we should know who he is by seeing this stuff. From the first day you met the X-Men, to the original Marvel Girl garb, to the older, wiser Marvel Girl, to Phoenix, to Black Queen. So shall I mold you, Jean Grey, until the day of the Hellfire Club claims you for its own. And Jean's clearly in a trance, and she said, oh, my mind wandered. See? My mind is wandering, right? So this power is the same thing. Whereas, like it's playing up, I mean, it can be different because there was actual affection, but all the elements are just playing out in Jean's everyday life where she can't even do anything when she's around Wolverine. And the same was happening with Jason Wyindgard, right? So here, Jean was knocked out by Proteus, but she was able to push back, right? So Mastemind is kind of always around, so, and he's in her head, so when she kind of revives, he makes her see Jason Wyindgard. And he says, Jason, I knew it was you. And Psycho's like, Jason? So this leads to some other events, right? So we get to meet Jason Wyindgard, right? He's still in Scotland, dashing, right? And he says, suddenly the door opens with the Red Lion Inn. Suddenly the door of the Red Lion Inn is flung open wide, and Jason Wyindgard steps out into the cool night air. Like Mutinette, he's a man of many faces, many shapes and faces, a man whose soul is as black as the devil's own. He has made himself the man of Jean Grey's dreams, and soon he will. Soon now he plans to win her love, and through that love, bind him to her. That assumes he lives, and this is Proteus who can take over people's bodies. But now we see he has some sort of psychic shield. Even though he doesn't see Proteus. Proteus is too weak to break through it. So it's saying he has telling us he has some sort of psychic powers, right? But we know, if we thought it was Mastemind, he has no psychic power, but he has the power of illusion, right? So Jean is trying to find Mutinex, but he's invisible to Jean's telepathic powers, right? So Jason Wyindgard sees that she's out in force, but that makes the most powerful X-Men the most vulnerable, right? So she goes through a time slip, right? He says, no, not again. When did it first happen? No. Did this happen before and I missed one of them? I thought I caught this in the beginning. Anyway, you see them, this is kind of like, I guess, a fox hunt, right? And she's on her black stallion, right? She goes, whoa, Satan. So it's all this negative imagery with her. The dogs are going after this creature, right? And Jason allows her to kill, and it's possibly an early mutant, from the old days. And it's actually not that. It's one of bodies that Proteus has left, right? So they finished off Proteus, and we see Jason Wyindgard in a Hellfire Club plane, and he says, each time it's becoming easier to touch Jean's mind as our psychic rapport grows even closer. And why not? I'm merely giving her the taste of some of most innermost forbidden needs and desires. With her angel soul, as in all of our souls, lurks the devil, a yang counterpart to the surface yin. And all I'm doing is freeing that negative part of herself from a moral code, right? Or moral cage, right? So we see Jean, she's with the team in the Blackbird, but she gets whisked away again. And they're shipping abroad, they're shipping, and they're on a ship here, and they're going back to New York, right? And this is it's like 200 years back, right? So it's like the what? This is 19. It's like 1780, 80. What was it? 1779, right? So you see, Jean is really taken with Jason Wyindgard, but she finally fights back. She's able to walk away, and she thinks, hey, this is one of my ancestors. And she thinks, wow, this is a really dark ancestor, but probably be easier to explain that maybe Jean liked, what's the name? She liked some sort of novels from the past from this stage, right? And we see Cyclops kind of bring her out of it, right? And she can see the effects of it, but he doesn't know what's going on with Jean. So this was kind of her being out of thought, right? So we see her in New York at a disco, and then Jason comes up, and then next thing you know, she's at her marriage. She's getting married to Jason Wyindgard, right? And totally, so then she's totally out of control. And then what do we see? Locked in a kiss, just like the way Wolverine would lock. And she doesn't know how she got here. Totally powerless to Jason Wyindgard, right? And then we see Scott was there for it. And he said, how do I explain? Not even sure what happened myself. Did the answer of mine marry an ancestor of Jason Wyindgard's? And to serve me those clothes, what kind of woman was she? And then I've never seen her act like that. It was like she wasn't Jean at all, only someone that looked like her. And the announcer, right? So, and then later they stopped the White Queen, but now they're trying to go in there, slip in there in their civilian attire and meet up with the Angel gets them into the Hellfire Club. And Jean and Cyclops are having a great moment. And who comes along but Jason and just snatches her away. And he has total control over her. And this is the problem I have with the retcon that Wolverine has this power over Jean. And it's just so old-timey, like Samantha from, what's that thing, from Sex and the City, where, like one of the guys saying she's just a physical person. It's just kind of really old school. And we have men and women writing this stuff, right? So, but this is mind control. Like, this is totally mind control, right? We see them going upstairs and Cyclops like, nah, it ain't happening. And we see Jean, she's all for it, but it's actually Mastermind. And wow. It's a powerful point. When I bought this back issue, I was just like, wow. I'm a fan of Mastermind, fan of the old X-Men. So it's really cool to see that he was back. And he doesn't know. He said he could have figured it out early, but his jealousy kept it away. But Jean is totally been taken over by Jason Wyindgard, which is Mastermind, right? And now she's the Black Queen. And as the Black Queen, right again, right? So he can kiss her whenever he wants, right? He just has total power over her, right? And Jean also sees the X-Men as this ancestor. I guess they're saying it's from the 1600s. It said 200 years in the past. 19, I get it. Be about maybe 300 years in the past. So 250. Let's say 250. Split. No, it'd have to be 300, right? And at this point, Cyclops is trying to use the psychic rapport to free Jean, but Mastermind is in there. So there's nothing he can do. And this is where you realize how can Mastermind do any of this stuff, right? And Cyclops is trying to fight him on his terms, but it really doesn't make any sense. And he kind of dies for it, but Cyclops is strong enough to come out of a psychic death, right? And I just wanted to show you, here's a part where we have Jean lost in thought, and then we have Jean lost in thought, right? So what can I say? I'm not too keen on this retcon, right? Um, I enjoyed Wolverine having a crush on Jean, but nothing, it not going anywhere. This turned into she just falls apart when Wolverine's around. It's just like totally ridiculous. I know it was done a lot in fan fiction. I know, I guess Chris Claremont got wind of it and liked it, and then he turned it in, especially since he was, the point of giving Cyclops Kid was he was getting rid of Cyclops. So at some point he liked the fact that Jean was back, so we got to play, he got to play in Jean's head. So this kind of, I guess, worked for him. So everyone started to play to this, but it's not the relationship, and I'm putting it down. And if we go all the way back to where we started, we'll have a nice young Jean, so they cannot put him with put her with Hugh Jackman. So that's all I got. Spinner Rack is out.